Yes, I'm wearing my fancy bathrobe. Leave me alone. I needed a day at home all day after the crazy New Year's weekend that I had. Happy 2024, by the way. Anyway, I'm here to talk about this book, Divine Rivals. This was essentially my favorite book of the year last year. And I'm here to talk about that. The sequel in the duology, because there's two of them, came out last month in December. It's called Ruthless Vows. I'm in the middle of reading this one right now, and it's so, so good. And I like the contrast between these book covers, by the way. It's like a nice little yin yang. Kind of prefer this to the Barnes & Noble exclusive cover, just because it's kind of similar in color palette to this. So yeah, Divine Rivals, though, I'm talking about the general premise of, I guess, the whole series, since, spoiler free and everything. But let's dive right into it. Divine Rivals is this essentially frenemies to lovers sort of story, which is been popular this year, especially on the heels of something like, I don't know, Fourth Wing, which attained like huge commercial success by Rebecca Yarros. And it was like this huge blockbuster of a book about like a dragon riding academy, military academy, and it's an adult fantasy book, so it's pretty graphic, sex and violence and all that stuff. But it's really cool to see books attaining that level of commercial success again. Anyway, without having like a film adaptation or whatever. But Divine Rivals, kind of in the same vein. This is marketed toward YA though, so it's a little lower toned down compared to something like that. Divine Rivals, instead of being about dragons and like a big military academy, well, there's still like a military side to it because it's about like war between these nations, and it's about the role journalism plays in wartime, and politics, and cities and everything. The setting of this book is essentially just like late 1800s, early 1900s time period in the real world. Yeah, technology pretty much works the same. There's like motor vehicles and early electricity and things like that. And there's like newspapers, and there's like a functioning city like that. And it's essentially about two teenagers who are like are young adults who are of opposing classes. We have on one hand we have Iris Winnow, who's from a working class family. She lives in a dingy little apartment with her single mother, who's an alcoholic, and they're just scraping by. Her brother, Forrest, has just gone off to the war in question, and so she knows firsthand that like it's affecting her family firsthand because she hasn't heard from her brother who went to the front lines, and she has no she thinks he might have like gone absent without leave or was killed in the war. So she's personally being affected by this war, and Iris is this brilliant young writer who lucked out. She took a chance and like entered this journalism contest and essentially sent a piece into this newspaper in the city where she lives called the Oath Gazette. The city is called Oath. um, and then the manager there takes a chance on her and hires her. And despite her age and despite inexperience, she starts writing as a rookie columnist for the newspaper. And there she meets her rival in question, who is this guy named Roman Kit. He's a young man who comes from a well-off, wealthy family, like an upper-class family. So he's expected to just like he's had everything handed to him in his life, and his parents expect him to just automatically get head columnist because of his position and his wealth and his education and everything. So him and Iris are both vying for like the same position from very different places and very different reasons. And that's kind of like the setup for the book is their rivalry, and her seeing him as like this entitled rich boy, and him seeing her as like this precocious like girl who doesn't have any idea what she's doing. But they do slowly warm up to each other, and get to know each other, and they're both still young, and they're both like relatively inexperienced compared to everybody else around them anyway. And the war is looming on the horizon, and it's affecting them both, and it's coming closer and closer to the city where they live. And Iris's, motivation is to find out what happened to her brother, and that's why she's so interested in investigating what's really happening on the front lines. Um, Roman, he's a little, let's just say he does have a troubled past that he hides from everybody that starts to come out as we see his side of the story as well. Um, and him and Iris sort of start opening up to each other, but it takes them a while. They have their boundaries up. They come from very different places in life, and circumstances do beckon them toward like more of the middle of the action of these four opposing countries, which, by the way, the divine in the title Divine Rivals alludes to the fact that history in this world is essentially, instead of politicians and kings and people like that, the countries were presided over by gods, like divine beings who like oversaw what the people were doing. And so there's sort of like this Hades and Persephone inspired, I feel like, plot. I feel like that's like a popular myth to riff off of in this day and age. Thanks, Aeneas Mitchell, for that. I guess I don't know, but I just think it's really cool. Without giving anything away about that backstory, there's sort of like a romance between two of the gods that results in lovers to enemies, sort of reverse roles in that regard, that led to a war, and a power struggle, and sort of like a commentary on the patriarchy, honestly. But yeah, all of that is the setup for these just two people getting together and competing against each other and getting, and yeah. Well, that is to say that this whole story, I feel like, was intended to be um, a commentary on how journalism and the pen is mightier than the sword sort of trope. I don't want to call it a trope, but like the truth of the matter that people on the front lines and people who write about things and get it published, news and propaganda and things like that are really effective in the real world as they are in this story. And I think there's never been I've never read quite like a fantasy story that quite touches on that side of things as much. Usually it's like the people with the swords and the action and everything. But no, in this, it's really about like observing the militaristic people from afar and then up closer and closer until you expose the truth. And I think that's really needed in fantasy literature. So my props to Rebecca Ross for doing that. There's also magical typewriters involved. I don't want to get too much into that because it's kind of a spoiler, but a wardrobe door that doesn't quite lead to Narnia, but leads to each other's hearts. And that's all I'm going to say about that. Read it.